Um, now, we're going to start talking about GI, and we'll continue talking about GI on Wednesday, along with the review. We will do the review of the quiz, the review of the study guide. We'll still cut out some time for the GI. But one thing that I want you to understand is when you talk about the system, you have to think about the main function. Okay, so we think about endocrine system. What is the main function of endocrine system? Huh? Maintain homeostasis, regulate, right? It regulates, maintains homeostasis. If there is a change, the response should be to return it back to what's considered normal, right? What is the main function of respiratory system? Just an example, huh? Yeah, breathe. So all responses, all physiological activities of respiratory system are dictated by the respiration. You always have to keep in mind it's all about breathing. Okay? What about GI? What's the main function of the GI? Why do we need it? So digest food, that's number one. What's number two? Absorb nutrients. Well, technically, kind of. What's number three? Well, that's minor, but yes. Okay, three, excrete the waste. So the whole thing is about break down the food, absorb the products of the breakdown, and get rid of whatever is left. Keep it in mind when we talk about all digestive activities. Now, in terms of the regulation, okay, before we get to that scheme on the left, what is the main stimulus, irritant? What gets the digestive system going? Huh? Food. Food. Think about food all the time, you know. If I tell you what will stimulate this process in a digestive system, you have to think it's probably food or lack of it. It's either we have food or we don't have food. Does that make sense? So, first I want to talk about the processes that happen in the digestive system and how they are regulated. So let's talk about regulation first. So as we just figured out, the stimuli, all the stimuli can be cut down to the word food. Whether you bite it, whether you smell it, taste it, think of it, okay? That's all stimuli. That's external stimuli. Like if you look at something tasting, you're going to start salivating, your stomach will start to produce juices and so on and so forth. Make sense? Internal stimuli is the food inside of the digestive tract. Does that make sense? Now, let's see how they stimulate the responses. So when you see or smell the food, can you tell apart the food that you like and the food that you don't? Do you consciously know that, like, I like steak but I don't like shrimp? Yes. So it's central. It's central nervous system, and it's not autonomic. Okay, you have conscious perception of that. The responses are autonomic, but you definitely know. You know that there's food. Okay, CNS. The internal stimuli. Where's my pen? Is the food in the tract. So food, when it say enters a part of the digestive tract, let's say stomach. What's going to change in the stomach when food enters it? Show. Yes, it's going to become bigger. It's going to stretch. So what type of stimulation is that? Like mechanical. Okay. We're going to see mechanical stimulation throughout the digestive tract. Every time the food enters, there is a stretch or some other stimulus. Does that make sense to you? Mechanical. What else is going to change? Huh? acid will increase as the result in response. When food just falls from the esophagus into the stomach, what immediately changes in the stomach? Before food fell into the stomach, what was there? Well, there was something. Acid, okay, acid, yes, hydrochloric acid. Okay, and then food falls in. What changes? Chemistry. Right, the whole chemistry changes. Does that make sense? For example, if you like drink something, you drink water, what's going to happen to the concentration of acid? It will go down. So in order to bring it back up, what will happen? Your digestive activities will go up. Does that make sense? Same goes if you throw some food in there. Acid concentration will also go down initially. Does that make sense? So you change chemical environment. It applies to stomach, it applies to intestine, it applies to anything. Make sense? Change chemical environment. So you got mechanoreceptors, stretch, chemoreceptors, chemistry. Also, the concentration of solutes, like you eat something salty versus not salty. Okay, osmoreceptors, sorry, will also have a play. Does that make sense? Now think about this. I'm going to show it on myself. So here's approximately, well, okay, intestine. Okay, here's intestine, roughly. So food is in the intestine. There are sensations, chemical sensations, mechanical sensations. Where do sensations go in the first place? Not in the first place. Eventually they will get there. First place. The first order neurons. Where do they go? From receptors to not even here, huh? Spinal cord. They end up in the spinal cord. Does that make sense? So, some reflexes are spinal cord and back to the organ, not even the brain. Does that make sense? Some will make it there, will make to the spinal cord. Stretch will act on the hypothalamus, sending you a signal that you are full. Does that make sense? So yes, you have the long reflexes, either through the spinal cord or the brain. Does that make sense? Right? What is the main... Now, digestion. Is that sympathetic or parasympathetic activity? Parasympathetic, right? Rest and digest. So which nerve of the parasympathetic, which cranial nerve, controls most of the internal organs? Vagus. So this is vagovagal reflex. The stretch of internal organs or chemical changes will be signaled through the vagus nerve to the brainstem, and then brainstem will produce the response through the vagus nerve back to the internal organs. That's one of the examples of reflexes. Does that make sense? Okay. But interesting is that your gut, and by gut I mean stomach and intestine, has sort of a brain of its own. It's a network of neurons that is located in the submucosal and muscular layers of the wall. They will perceive the same stimuli, stretch or chemical changes, and will induce responses right here, in not even going to the brain. Does that make sense? Think about this as the little store, like a grocery store. Okay, Giant Eagle, they have a headquarters. I have no idea where, but they do. So if something is going on, in a local giant eagle. Like they have unusually high requests for bananas. Okay, I don't know, something. Okay, come up with something. I'm not really good at it. They have some changes. Do they have to ask permission of the headquarters every time something happens? Not really. A lot of smaller things they can deal with by themselves, right? So it's a local response. So there's going to be local reflexes. Reflexes of the gut brain. It is sometimes called like enteric nervous system. Seriously, it's a vast, huge system. Well, your intestines are big. And some responses will be initiated through the CNS. They're not opposite. They complement each other. Clear? Cool. What are two effectors of the nervous system? Two effectors, two categories of effectors, only two things that can be stimulated by the nervous system. Muscles and glands. So, the responses that can be produced. Muscles, what do? Huh? Well, they contract, they move, right? So movement. Glands, what do? Secrete. Secretions. Movement and secretions. Does that make sense? So, again, stimuli working either through the local or central nervous system produce responses by the smooth muscles or glands. Smooth muscles will be responsible for the peristalsis. Peristalsis, when you brush your teeth and you have a traditional tube with a toothpaste, you do peristalsis every time. When you squeeze the paste out, that's peristalsis. Okay? Squeezing at one side, widening at another. Squishing it through into one direction. Okay? From mouth to anus. What happens if peristalsis goes like in the wrong direction? Yeah, you throw up. That's a reverse peristalsis. Vomiting is the reverse peristalsis. Secretions. Can you name gastric not gastric, but digestive secretions that you know? Hydrochloric acid. Some of them you kind of feel almost every minute of your life. What about saliva? That's a secretion in digestive tract, right? Now those glands, salivary glands, glands that produce hydrochloric acid, glands that produce secretions in the intestines, are they exocrine or endocrine? Exocrine, right? Because it's not in the blood. Technically speaking, your entire digestive system is the gigantic hole that goes through the whole body. Right? Very convoluted, but whole nevertheless. Now let's chat about what's going on at each part of the digestive system. So you ingest food with your mouth. It's pretty much, ingestion is fancy word for putting the food in the GI tract initially. Then what do you do in the mouth? You chew. Is that a mechanical or chemical digestion? Mechanical. What else do? You produce saliva. Yes. Does it contain any enzymes? Yes. So it breaks down. Saliva breaks down some chemicals, some nutrients. What kind of digestion is that? Chemical. So you will see that there are two types in every part. Chemical and mechanical. Okay? So you chew, you break down some stuff, and you form the bolus. Does that make sense? When food is like, try to take something and just like a piece of bread, you chew on it, you can make it into like really tight, small bunch, right? What do you do with the food next? Swallowing. So that is called deglutition. Okay, we'll get to deglutition. No worries. And then when food enters the esophagus, it is being squished down, sorry, into the stomach. So that's your first example of peristalsis. Any type of activity that moves the food is called propulsion, right? Swallowing, peristalsis is a propulsion. Then eventually it gets into the stomach. Chemical digestion, hydrochloric acid, enzymes, and stuff like that. Mechanical. Have you seen the content of your stomach at least once in your life? I mean, it's still pretty, discernible. You can say what you had just a meal before. Well, remnants of it. So this is a pretty crude stuff. You need to break it down more. You have chemicals for it, and also your stomach breaks it, physically breaks it. Because the stuff that enters from stomach into the intestine, so-called chem, doesn't really remind of any food. It's pretty well digested, pretty smooth and homogeneous. Okay, and the same stuff happens in the intestines. So you have digestion, chemical digestion, and you have mechanical digestion, and this is the place where you absorb things. Nutrients get absorbed in the small intestine. Okay, nutrients, water, ions, vitamins, all that stuff. And finally, the final step is no less important, is the defecation. Okay, that is carried out by rectum and sigmoid colon. There's a reflex, and it's quite an interesting reflex. Okay, so those are activities, and you have to think about every time we talk about presence of something in that alimentary canal, in that tube. Okay, whether it's a food in the mouth, partially chewed food in the stomach, chem in the small intestine, or fecal matter in the sigmoid colon. It's always something that is chemically different or stretches it out or something like that. Does that make sense? Let's do the quiz.